Deus Ex: Human Revolution was a game that I enjoyed very much. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was overall a well-designed game that featured great level design and plenty of enjoyable game mechanics. And most of all, it was the game that made me fall in love with Cyberpunk as an aesthetic and as a genre. Oh sure, I love Blade Runner as much as the next guy, but Deus Ex: Human Revolution made me go and pick up Neuromancer and its sequels, first in German and later on in English again, once I trusted my understanding of the English language enough to read it. Not only was Deus Ex: Human Revolution a great game to play, it was also a great story to experience. While it mostly deals with transhuman augmentation as its core theme, there's also the ever-present topic of corporate rule and the feuds between corporations looming in the background. I bought Deus Ex: Human Revolution very cheap over a year after it launched. It was actually one of the very last PC games that I bought on physical media and one of the first ones after the initial Valve games that I registered on my Steam account. Once I started buying digital PC games exclusively, I obviously noted how much cheaper they were than their physical counterparts. This might not be true for everyone watching this video, but it was for me. On average, a digital release cost me less, especially since I didn't want most games on launch anyway. I had no trouble waiting to read reviews, see how other people felt about the games, what problems they've encountered, all while waiting for developers to patch and fix their games and see the game's price sink ever lower. Especially during the infamous Steam sales, where back then at least, even still relatively new games could be discounted by as much as 90% during a flash sale. To me, it just seemed like a win-win situation if I wait and don't rush out to buy the newest hot release right away, because I get the benefit of a patched game that plays better later down the line while getting it cheaper. Yeah, I might not be part of the immediate post-launch quote-unquote online discourse, but I primarily play games for their own sake, not to be part of something else. In the past 8 years, I haven't bought many games at full retail price. I had a constant flow of cheap games I could pick up in bundles or during sales, and I was better off waiting for a deal on a game so I wasn't hurting for entertainment. When Deus Ex: Mankind Divided was announced in 2015, I was absolutely determined to make an exception and buy it on launch. Human Revolution was one of my favorite games at the time, so you can already guess how excited I was for the sequel. But over the coming months, I saw things in there that I didn't like. The first alarm bell rang when I heard the term "augment your pre-order" for the very first time. By that time, I was already not inclined to ever pre-order a digital product anyway, because what's the point? It's not like Steam or any other digital storefront will run out of copies of the game, so there's no point in me pre-ordering something and giving a publisher or developer money before I've made sure they deserve it. However, the insidious part about the Augment Your Pre-Order campaign was that it involved a tiered system where further pre-order bonuses unlocked the more people pre-ordered the game. The incentive behind this was clear. Square Enix wanted to use gamers who were excited for Mankind Divided to act as salespeople on their behalf to push pre-orders on people if they wanted to get an extra in-game mission or early access to the final game by 4 whole days. Next to, of course, all the other usual stuff that comes with pre-orders, like consumable in-game items, a digital art book, a soundtrack sampler, not even the full fucking soundtrack, and either a digital comic or a digital novella. You didn't even get all the fucking bonuses, you had to choose between some of the ones on the same tiers, and if you wanted the rest, you had to buy that stuff separately. And yeah, that was the second alarm bell. Mankind Divided was going to have microtransactions in there, so if you wanted additional consumables, gadgets, or weapons, you could just buy them. That's right, those consumable items you got with your pre-orders were also just one-time consumables. Once you've used them in a save game, they were gone. And of course, who could forget about the entirely forgettable Breach mode based on the absolute worst part of the single-player campaign? They tried to turn Deus Ex, a franchise known at this point for thoughtful, open-world, immersive sim, single-player narrative gaming, into a live-service business model with daily challenges and rewards. I also heard mumblings at the time about the game having a troubled development, where Square Enix basically forced Eidos Montreal to cut the intended narrative of Mankind Divided in half in order to wring out another sequel out of the property, which evidently was the case based on the horrendous cliffhanger that the game ends on. Once I heard about all of this, I immediately decided that I wouldn't buy the game on launch after all. I'd wait for a couple of months and grab it during a sale. And that's exactly what I did when I got it for 75% off in December of that year. Now I can already hear you asking, what does all of this have to do with Cyberpunk 2077? Well, as I've mentioned, in the past 8 years I haven't bought that many games on launch for their full asking price. In fact, there was only one game in that entire time that I bought on launch, and that was CD Projekt Red's The Witcher 3. I was a big fan of the original Witcher game. Yeah, it's a very janky title with terribly unresponsive combat, hideous graphics, and downright awful voice acting. But it also had something magical about it. It wasn't just a conventional RPG, the world it was set in didn't feel like the millionth variation on Tolkien like many other fantasy settings, and the writing, while not highbrow by any means, was fairly different from other fantasy fare. I didn't play The Witcher 2 straight away when it came out, my computer from back then couldn't handle that game at all, so again I waited and eventually got it for cheap when I had a computer that could run it. I was a bit underwhelmed by The Witcher 2, but it showed definite signs of improvement on many fronts, even though I would still consider it the worst game of all three when viewed as a whole. But by that time I had also read the Witcher novels and was fully immersed in the lore, so I was absolutely on board with just pulling the plug and buying The Witcher 3 on launch. And for what it's worth, I wasn't disappointed. I don't think I need to go into great detail about why The Witcher 3 was a great game. However, you can certainly see by now how history repeats itself. Just like Deus Ex Human Revolution, the Witcher games made me go out and read books, and they became some of my favorite games. At around the same time I played Deus Ex Human Revolution, CD Projekt Red announced Cyberpunk 2077. You can already guess that my interest was piqued, to say the least. But I'd argue that the very early announcement was a bit of a mistake, and I think you'll find no one will agree more with me on that than CD Projekt Red themselves. Over the passing years, the hype buildup was immense, with people speculating about and clamoring for this game at every opportunity. And let me just say that stuff like this needs to stop. Please, for your own sake, don't get hyped up for upcoming products, don't purposefully blind yourselves in your anticipation. Sure, be excited for things that excite you, but don't let this stuff consume you to the point where you attack other people over it. Don't harass reviewers or other gamers who say things about a game you think you love but haven't actually played yet. Enjoy the things you enjoy for their own sake, independent of whatever someone else might think about them. This was a bit of a tangent right now, but I think it needs to be said because fanboys are just the worst, and fanboys for unreleased things are infinitely worse. Always keep in mind that the target of your misguided vitriol is a living, breathing human being. Also remember that this is just a video game at the end of the day. There's absolutely no justification to attack, harass, and hurt people over a video game. Anyway, that's not why I won't be buying Cyberpunk 2077 in the near future. At least not the fan behavior. However, there was some other behavior that made me choose not to buy Cyberpunk 2077. CD Projekt Red has always presented itself as a champion of gamers. They argued that downloadable content should be free and that digital rights management or DRM both doesn't work to deter piracy, and it also sucks for legitimate customers to have to deal with it. And they also run GOG.com, so they keep old games alive and playable on modern hardware. All these are things I agree with, but what I don't agree with is treating their employees like crap. What I don't agree with is rushing out a game to meet a Christmas release window. And what I don't agree with is ripping off customers by lying about their product. So let's talk about that. For months it has been reported that employees of CDPR had to crunch, to work overtime in order to get the game out on time. The executives always try to spin it as a more humane version of crunch than the one experienced at other development studios, but let's not kill ourselves. This was mandated overtime in order to ship out a product to meet a deadline. And it's not like this was a hard deadline, they've already postponed release dates before. Hell, they delayed the game after they proudly announced that the game had gone gold, a term that usually denotes that the piece of software is finished and ready to be distributed. Given the embarrassing number of bugs the game shipped with, it would have been better to just fix the game for another year without having their employees slave away on mandated overtime in order to implement features such as customizable genitalia. I wouldn't want to be the poor bastard who was tasked with implementing the biggest waste of time in gaming history since shrinking horse testicles in Red Dead Redemption 2. Maybe if they had delayed it, they could have just focused on the next-gen consoles instead of targeting the PS4 and the Xbox One, where by all accounts the game simply doesn't run or look as advertised. I didn't buy Deus Ex Mankind Divided on launch because Square Enix employed predatory pre-release marketing tactics and compromised the game's quality in order to implement a dead-on-arrival live service and a forced cliffhanger to sell a sequel that we're not even sure will ever see the light of day. And the sad thing is that for all this shit Square pulled, Mankind Divided far surpasses Human Revolution in terms of gameplay. I seriously loved playing every single second of that game, as I expected. It's still one of my favorite games to this very day, strictly in terms of gameplay. And yet, I don't feel like I've missed anything by having waited for a couple of months and paid a fraction of the asking price to do so. Similarly, if professional reviews are to be trusted, Cyberpunk 2077 apparently is an excellent game if you disregard the technical problems that they'll hopefully manage to fix in the coming weeks or months. But CD Projekt Red lied about their product, they lied about their treatment of their employees, and they treat their employees like shit. I will simply not reward behavior like this by handing over $70 for a rushed, broken product built on the backs of employees who will work to the bone for it. I will just maintain course, wait for a couple of months for the bugs to get fixed, for the game to become less profitable for them, and then I'll buy the game in 6 to 12 months from now for a fraction of the price. Doing so won't make the things the actual creators of this game had to go through magically disappear, I'm aware of that. But I hope it will send a message to CDPR's executives that no game is worth losing sleep and health over. I'm not a game journalist, I don't get the games I play for free, I'm just a mere gamer who loves this medium. But I can't in good conscience enjoy Cyberpunk 2077 knowing that I'd abide this behavior by forking over $70 on launch. And I don't care that the company issued apologies after the fact and offered refunds for console players. I also don't care that they apologized to their staff after downplaying the severity of the crunch. This isn't the first time crunch has happened at CD Projekt Red, and it also isn't the first time someone has overpromised on a rushed title that left paying customers wondering why they even paid for a product like that. Apologies are only acceptable if you did everything in your power to not let something negative happen. They're not a get-out-of-jail-free card you play once you willingly behave immorally. I could just pirate Cyberpunk 2077 if I wanted to, of course. Since CDPR offered their games DRM-free on GOG.com, I could easily find a torrent or some other source and have the game run flawlessly in a matter of minutes. But I won't engage in criminal activity just for the sake of being able to play the game immediately. That won't send the right message. Because the message is this: I was willing to wait. I was willing to wait for the game to come out in a playable state, and I was willing to wait if the developers needed more time to complete the game under actually humane work conditions. The ones not willing to wait were the executives and the shareholders. This message is for them alone. And that's why I'm willing to wait for the game to drop in price, and once it does, I'll buy it on Steam or any other service that takes their own share of the revenue so as little as possible goes to CD Projekt Red. I think this well-trodden quote from The Dark Knight best sums up my disappointment in CD Projekt Red. You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. CD Projekt Red was a darling of both press and customers alike, but it only took a few short years for them to become just like everybody else in this industry. And I find it ironic that all it took was a game called Cyberpunk, a genre defined by shady, greedy corporations that exploit their workers.